Very warm welcome once again to all of our attendees. For this morning, we want to take a look at contract versus private. Now, many of you are going to be going to sites this morning. Perhaps you're already on a contract. This could be in the construction industry, or perhaps you're even working at a corporate building where your client is in the corporate industry. Generally, your client or client agent will then design a safety specification for you. This safety specification is generally done by the client agent. Sometimes it's by the client themselves, but generally they get a client agent, somebody who's approved. Currently, we are getting client agents approved by the SACP CMP in terms of your construction regulations. And this outlines all the health and safety requirements for that specific site. Now, this will include site rules, entry permits, inductions, audit requirements. They will also even give you a baseline risk assessment that has been designed in order to understand exactly what is the scope of risk on that site. Now, for a corporate client, they generally don't give you a baseline risk assessment, but what they will do is give you a task or issue-based risk management plan. And this is generally inside the safety specification. We have had some corporate clients, such as Coca-Cola or Vodacom, they issue us with a risk assessment or a baseline risk assessment, that is, depending on the scope of work that we are performing. So when we are on a site where we are going to be working in the entire site, so some of our clients do solar panels and backup generators. And so we are working pretty much on the entire site. Everywhere where there's electrical contacts, we are working in and around that area. And so we need a baseline risk assessment to understand everything that could affect us or impact us when we are on that site. However, when we go into perhaps Nedbank or Standard Bank, we are only going into a specific kitchen area or a specific bathroom area, maybe one building, not all of their buildings around SA, maybe just one in Johannesburg. And as a plumber, we only need to know that specific building's safety specification or risk assessment. And so you can see it's very much issue or task site specific. And that is where the contract risk assessment or contract health and safety comes into play. Now, they always categorize their risk as well as their contractual subcontractors' risk. For instance, if we had somebody coming onto site, such as Steiner, just to fill up perhaps soap dishes and put in the paper towels, make sure from a hygiene perspective that is in place, you can see that it's not a very high risk set of tasks that they are going to be performing. See, they'll offload certain equipment. Yes, we'll need to know how they're stacking and storing it and manually carrying it from where they're storing it to where it needs to come out in the dispensers, and then walking in and around the environment, as well as due to POPI, we want to protect those individuals who are in there. And so there's clauses between the client and the contractor to ensure that all privacy is kept private. So there's restricted access in certain areas. Only certain people within that contract are allowed in certain buildings or certain areas of the building and so forth. And so this takes a lot of planning, a lot of preparation. But once it's documented, it's very simple to follow it because it's step by step. Now, this is the same as you will receive as a plumber. You will receive a set of instructions or what they call a contractor pack. And that explains to you how your file should be designed according to the safety specification. And please read the safety spec. Yes, it does take a little bit of time, but often when you've designed your health and safety file, you might have designed it in the correct index or the correct format of how they're going to audit your file. But oftentimes we forget that in the safety specification under, let's say, for instance, COVID-19 now, they are asking you specifically to ensure that you look after your own eating area, that you look after your bucky, and that you also ensure that COVID protocols are followed when you're passing tools between employees. You see, nobody wants to pass a tool from one employee to another without it being sanitized. So how do you ensure that that is being done? Most people say, well, we're wearing gloves while working, and so it's going to be on our gloves, and that's fine. But there's still a possibility for cross-contamination. And so you might not have covered that in your COVID management plan or your risk assessment that should cover COVID within your normal issue-based risk assessment. The specification will tell you what to include in your plans or in your risk assessment. So please read them. They are vitally important for you to make sure that not only are you site specific, but that you also have what your client requires you to have in your file. This is why a lot of files are being sent back, and it is a problem. Some safety guys just say it's not site specific, and then that's where they leave it. I prefer to tell the contractors it's not site specific, and these are the reasons, and how can we get you to become site specific. So let's just explain very briefly what it means to be site specific. So it considers three things. For one, it means that you have considered how your tasks are going to impact the site. So you have to do plumbing works. Now you need to figure out all the type of plumbing that you're going to be putting on site. Is it maintenance? Is it new installations? What types of tools and equipment are you bringing to site? Are you bringing any hazardous chemical substances to site? Are you doing any high-risk works when you are on site as well? So all of those tasks are going to have an impact on the actual site and the environment around you. And then you need to look at it from a perspective of how are you impacting the site from a health perspective, including COVID, but as well as dust generation, noise generation, the ergonomics that you're going to have to consider for your employees. And then you're going to look at the safety aspect. How is your job going to affect the safety, not just of yourself, but of those who might also be present on site, other contractors, employees of your client. And it is still your scope of work. So you need to look out for the health and safety, not just of your own company employees, but also those who might be affected that are around you. So please keep that in mind, because your tasks do have a safety risk. Then you're going to look at the environmental impact that you're going to have on the site. Then you're going to now look at the health and safety plan, your environmental management plan, your waste management plan. And this is why you are being requested to plan for each one of these things. Now, the second part is that you will now need to take into consideration how the site will impact you. So when you get to site, you might be doing plumbing, but where will you be doing the plumbing? Are you going to be working on a roof? Will you require a scaffold? Do you need to hire a cherry picker? Do you need to dig excavations or trenches? Will you have to work in close proximity to other contractors? Perhaps other contractors are working above you, and so no work is allowed to be done underneath them. Again, it all comes down to proper planning of what is going to be done on site and what you need to be doing specifically. Then the third consideration is the specific hazards and risks of your own scope of work. So yes, you have the impact on the site, you have the site's impact on you, and then you have your own set of specific hazards and risks, designing your own task-specific risk assessment. This is what it means to be site-specific. Now, how would you know this unless you were at the site? How would you know this if you didn't understand what the impacts you have on the site or what the site has on you? Or if you haven't designed a proper, specific risk assessment program for yourself. Now, this is not just a normal documented risk assessment. We are speaking about a risk management plan, something substantial, something sufficient to manage risk. That is your own personal risk, the risk that you impact on, and the risk that you will have when you are on site. And this is one of the requirements of the OSH Act. And so you might think, well, when I get to a private home, the owner or the tenant doesn't give you a contractor's pack. They don't ask you for your risk assessment. There's no need for a health and safety plan because that's specific to construction sites. However, you still fall under the requirements of the Occupational Health and Safety Act, as well as other regulations like facilities, general safety, general admin. All of that still applies to you, regardless of whether you're in the construction industry or if you're on a private home. You see, there's a specific regulation, the construction regulations. As soon as you are doing construction-related work, that automatically comes into play. But there's nowhere that the Occupational Health and Safety Act does or doesn't come into play. You see, it's always there. As soon as you have a business, whether you're self-employed or whether you have employees, it automatically affects you, and you have to uphold the minimum requirements of that act. This means that as a company, you should have a safety file, but what we actually want from you is a safety management system. So not just a file with a whole lot of documents in it. We want a management system that works on what we call Plan, Do, Check, Act, or PDCA, something that is continual, something that works every single day, and that it's live. In other words, it's breathing within your own company. And this is something that needs to be upheld at a private home. Now, you might be asking yourself, when you go to a private home, do you have a safety file with you that's got your own individual risk assessment in for the task? Do you have your continual based risk assessments? Do you do a toolbox talk? Do you have your registers and checklists, your PPE issue? All of these things should actually be in your file in your vehicle. So let's take a look at that in more detail. The Plan, Do, Check, Act system. Again, it takes planning. You need to plan for your work. Now, you might not know what site you are walking into. See, a private individual phones you and says, you've got to come to site and we need you to replace our geyser. You might ask questions, is it outside? Is it inside? Is it in the roof? You can get some sort of information, but you've never seen that site. And nobody's asking you to go and do a site inspection first before you perform the works. But you can do it on the day. You can perform a site inspection just before you start working. Now, what is this? Well, it's a risk assessment. You're going to identify hazards, assess the risk, and then make some sort of safe work procedure on going about doing your task. We won't leave it to chance. And also, we're not just going to do it verbally. So we can have a 1 or 2 page document like a DSTI, a daily safe task instruction. This is a form of continuous risk assessment. Ask yourself a few questions. Are there any high risk tasks that you have to perform? Yes, working with electricity, working with plumbing, working with water, waste, all of that falls into various categories of risk, including heights, digging trenches, other services, and then also the COVID interactions between yourself and that private individual. All of that needs to be rated or included in a risk assessment so that you can keep yourself safe, you can keep your employees safe, you can protect the environment around you, and more importantly, you want to protect the private individual who is also there on site. So here's a few things that you should have in a safety file that should be kept in your various vehicles. You should have a risk assessment based on the actual task that you're performing. And this is good for employee training. They should know and understand their risks of that specific task. And that you can do before you even get to site, because you know your various specific risks to installing plumbing, maintaining plumbing, or removing and swapping out plumbing. Then you're going to have a continuous based risk assessment. This is a blank template that you will complete only once on site. It's not going to take you very long, depending on the scope of work that you are performing at the private client, but it's only a few minutes at some stages where you are just going to outline how the site is going to impact you, how you are impacting the site, and then again, are there any additional risks that you have noticed aside from your task-based risk assessment? And this is what you're going to note down. And as a suggestion, do it as a team. You see, because if you do it as a team, you're automatically doing toolbox talk information. You see, you're bringing risk and safety over to your employees or to your coworkers. And then it's going to ask you to design a step-by-step procedure for keeping yourself safe. And this is where your safe work procedure comes in. While you are doing that, you are training the individual. You are training yourself to understand the risk and understand the safe procedure. Now all you need to do is inspect. You need to check, again, a documented paper where you have to tick or fill in or sign that you have inspected your tools, your equipment, the site, etc., the PPE, and then you will have a register of what you brought to site, what you left at site, and what you removed from site. And all of that is a small, simple type of safety file that forms a management system. You see, you're managing your risk continually, not just handing in a safety file at a main contractor and getting audit results and, quickly filling in documents at the end of the month. It's something that must be continual. Now, as plumbers, you know this because you're required to work according to the SAN standards. And when you work according to SAN standards, there is a specific method that you have to follow, as well as ensuring that it is checked. And if it is checked, you are then issued a COC. Now, health and safety is exactly the same. You need to work according to a specific set of standards. This is governed by the Occupational Health and Safety Act, but really it is formulated by you, the individual, the company that must design a management system, something that is alive within your company, that each individual understands their role and what part they play within that system. So a question, do you have a system? Do you have a system that manages risk? Every company should have their own risk assessment for the tasks they perform, including, and this is very, very important, and many companies do not have this, a risk management plan. The plan will outline what you should take to a private site, such as continuous-based risk assessments, DSTIs, or similar types of risk management. It will also explain to you the safe working procedures, the methodologies, and what is the process of plan, do, check, act in terms of risk management for your company. Then you will have continual improvement, a systematic check or evaluation of your control measures. You see, we change things quite often, changing sites, changing tools, changing equipment, changing the method of performing certain works. And because we change, we need to check whether the safe working procedure is still efficient in keeping us safe. Not just the type of PPE that we use, but the type of method of performing the tasks. And this continual improvement is then measured by your incidents and accidents. Now, how many of us actually have a documented method of checking whether we're having an incident, an accident, a near miss, or is it only when it's something serious that we have to go into COID, fill in FEM forms, or fill in WCL forms for the Department of Labor, and then we have an Annexure 1 that we've got to complete according to your general administrative regulations? Is that the only time where we document what is happening in terms of incidents and accidents? Or are we aware of them every single day? Now, I'd like to make a suggestion to yourselves as plumbers, and we're going to be sending this out to all members of IOPSA, and we want to get every single plumber in South Africa involved in this. And the reason for this is we want to design certain statistic analysis for what is happening in the industry. You see, we're not on site with you every day, and we'd like to design a little online form. It's going to be an anonymous form, so you're not going to put your name or ID number or cell phone number or email address in. You're only going to log in. You're going to explain what happened, the date, obviously, that is what we would need. So the date of what happened, the near miss, the first aid incident, the major incident, any of that information. Tell us what happened and how you think we could prevent that from happening. And this is what we're going to use in future to design certain toolbox talks. And once a month, we want to have a feature toolbox talk on what is actually happening out there. Now, again, it's going to be anonymous. We won't know where it comes from because it's online. You can log in from your phone, from your PC. We're not going to track IP addresses or anything like that. And again, we're not going to take any personal information from you. We are only wanting to know the details of the actual incident, whether it's a near miss, something could have happened, it almost happened, you slipped and fell, or perhaps something dropped next to you and didn't actually hurt anybody, it didn't damage anything. And we want to find out how many times that actually happens. And the reason for this is it might happen to you once a week. But with the 6,500 members that we have, we might find it happening 6,500 times a week. And that's a red flag, because this means that there is an area or an opportunity for risks to become injuries or illnesses. And so we want to ask you, please, is this something you would actually support? And so we're going to design it, we're going to be sending it out, but we really need you to assist us. And the reason for that is we need to be able to have that information to assist you. All right, moving on to the next thing, task specific. This is very important. Everything must be specific. So even though you may not know what the private site has in store, as we mentioned, you don't know where you might be working, you can ask certain things in order to give you an understanding. But when you get there, you can have template documents in order to find out the specifics when you are on site. Time management is going to be important. So if you thought the job was going to take you an hour, just have an extra few minutes before that task. So add on a little bit of more time so that you can do your safety first. Then during the work, you remain safe. And when you finish up, you've got documented proof that you have now implemented a safety management system or a risk management system. And then don't forget your tools and equipment. All tools and equipment should be checked by you personally as a company. This is not only a requirement of being on a site. So you should have your own internal policies and procedures of how you are going to look after tools and equipment. Are there daily inspections, weekly inspections, monthly inspections, maintenance programs? This is all actually internal because it's your tools and equipment. This might be copied and pasted into a site-specific safety file for construction, where you have dedicated tools for that construction site. But as a company, this should automatically be implemented for yourselves. So thank you very much.